There are no planned fire drills, so if the alarm activates, please leave the building in an orderly fashion via your nearest fire exit. Please use either the fire exit through the main doors of the hall or the fire exit in the storeroom adjacent to the stage. The fire assembly point is the island on the front of the main entrance to the building. Please do not delay your evacuation to collect any belongings. Please do not return to the building until given permission to do so by council staff. Please note that the meeting will be live streamed. Please switch off mobile phones or turn them to silent. And toilets and hand washing facilities are available in the foyer area. Members, we have quite a full agenda, so just a reminder, please keep your line of questioning or your comments succinct and to the paper. That's okay. Agenda item 1, apologies for absence. I have apologies here from Councillor Milne and Councillor Mrs Gadsden. Is there anybody else? Thank you. Agenda item 2, there are no substitute members. Agenda item 3, non-members attending. Councillor Eves is in attendance. Agenda item 4, minutes of the meeting held on the 5th of July 2023. Are the minutes agreed, members? Agreed, lovely, thank you. Agenda item 5, to receive declarations of interest. Members, are there any declarations of interest? Nobody is indicating, thank you. Agenda item 6, the overview of housing and homelessness across the Rochford District Council. Members, I will now invite Lauren Stretch, the Council's Director for Housing, to introduce this report.
Good evening all. So at the request of members and the chairman of this committee, this report gives a general overview of housing and homelessness across the Rochford district. You will have this report in front of you and there's nothing new to note in it to add to this. So I'll bring you to the recommendations, which were to note the information contained in within the appendices of this report and make any recommendations in line with the information contained within the report. I'm happy to take any questions that you might have.
Thank you. Members, are there any questions? Councillor Cross.
Page 6.5, 4.1. Facing homelessness is stressful. Is there a timeline for the triaging system and letting applicants know? Also, could officers advise what support is given if the eviction date is known? For example, if their eviction date is end of October, what measures to make it as fluid and less stressful for the person stroke family to prevent homelessness?
Thank you. Lauren.
So there are timelines set out within the law from the Homeless Reduction Act. So, for example, duties kick in to assist someone to prevent their homelessness 56 days before they are likely to become homeless. However, I would say that within Rochford, the service goes above and kind of beyond this. So when a homeless application is made, we make contact and triage all applications within a couple of days, regardless of how far in the future the person may be facing homelessness, and appointments are given to those in need as quickly as we can, and that's usually within a couple of days. It's my belief that the kind of quicker that you are able to assess and provide advice, the more likely a positive result would be reached, and so therefore better for the resident. And even if a duty is not owed, the earlier we make somebody aware of this and what options are available to them, then the more time they have to make arrangements. It's not always possible to prevent people's homelessness, but where the council does owe a duty to assist, we'll always look to provide that necessary advice and assistance as quick as possible. So, for example, that's sometimes rent in advance and a deposit. And obviously, if you can tell people that that is on offer to them, then they've got a better chance of securing accommodation.
Thank you. Does that answer your question, Councillor Cross?
It absolutely does. Thank you, Chairman.
Lovely, thank you. Councillor Wotton.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, and thank you for a most informative report. I particularly welcome table at 1.3, setting out the housing association providers across the district. Straightforward question. We know that when a significant amount of our housing stock transferred to Sanctuary, there are obligations on them to provide a certain volume of housing and have growth. What obligations are there on housing associations to expand their supply? How does that actually work in practice?
So in reality, they are like a business and an organisation within their own right. So there are no obligations for them to extend, and obviously they are under kind of the same financial obligations as a local authority. So they would only do so where that makes sense and they are able to. I'd point out at this point that that is going to become quite difficult for people to expand in the current market. It is with everybody, including housing associations.
Thank you. Does that answer your question, Councillor Wharton?
Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you. Councillor Mrs Belton.
Thank you. I have two questions, if I may. So my first question relates to 6.3 item 1 and the housing association stock. We don't have any details in here regarding void properties for each of the housing associations. Now, I know obviously the void situation is down to the housing association specifically, but do we do anything to ensure that the targets are met? We all know of a number of void properties throughout the district, and if they were turned around much quicker, the numbers on our list would be shorter and we'd need less homes. So I just want to understand what we, the council, are doing to enforce that.
So I'll just give you a bit of background, though, just to sort of give you some level of reassurance, well, as much as I can. So nationally, there is evidence to show that void turnaround times are going up, and there are several reasons for that. So often the health and safety regulations have increased around properties at the moment, and so the requirements on people to bring something up to a lettable standard have increased, and there are obviously large staff shortages plus building material shortages. So nationally, that's not something unique to the Rochford district. That is nationally the picture. I am meeting regularly with the housing associations that are operating locally, specifically the ones that have a lot of stock here. And this is something that we are continuing to raise with them. They assure me that obviously they would not want to leave properties emptier for longer than is necessary because they have income targets on the lettable stock. But they do have to make sure that properties are habitable and meeting their letting standards and are health and safety compliant before they can be returned. And unfortunately, at the moment, they are having to use their resources to make sure full blocks are compliant as well.
Does that answer your first question?
It does, thank you. And then my second question, it's on the same vein, page 6.7, 5.6, relating to rehousing into the private sector. Southend City Council have a robust policy when it comes to empty homes in the private sector. Are Rochford doing anything to ensure that we don't have private rented properties or privately owned properties that are sat empty for long periods of time? And what are we doing to incentivise landlords to getting those into use?
Okay, so empty homes sits under my colleague, Miss Lily, but I will answer that because I do know a little bit about this. So we do have an empty home strategy that was adopted in 2015. It details that officers will consider the use of enforcement action, but only after all avenues to encourage the owner to bring the property back into use have been exhausted. The council's approach to date has been more informal. Owners of empty properties are contacted by letter, making them aware of their option, encouraging them to bring the property back into use. I believe that over 100 visits were carried out each last year to specifically prioritise sites with a kind of proactive approach of targeting that information to the owners of kind of long-term empty homes. So if applicable, the owners were made aware that there are well homes empty property grants for certain works that are available to help them bring the homes back into use in return for us having nomination rights for a limited period of time. As always, residents are always encouraged to report empty homes via the dedicated web page or email so that we can carry out that work and try and encourage them back into use.
Does that answer your questions?
Yes, thank you.
Lovely, thank you. Councillor Ward, please.
Thank you, Chairman. It's actually on the cost of such things as bed and breakfast and all the rest of it. And looking at 6.6, page 6.6, 5.4 going on to 5.5. Looking at all the various, how can I put it, monies that are going out of the council to support homelessness, has it been considered that we could have a remedy in council-owned modular accommodation? Is this being looked at, and has there been a review to look at the cost balance of money going out and actually having our own accommodation, albeit modular, which would be quick and easy to set up? Is that being looked at, or has it been reviewed? Can we know what you're doing?
Yes, so this year's housing service plan is focusing on two kind of key areas around temporary accommodation. So the first thing that I've brought in is the review of all TA temporary accommodation placements. So we need to review everybody that's currently in temporary accommodation. Some have been there for a while, and look at strategies we can to move them on into sort of more permanent accommodation, because that frees up the accommodation, and not all of it is as costly as bed and breakfast. The second thing that really needs to happen is we do need to understand our true net cost of temporary accommodation in each of the options. We don't, obviously some is, we get income back from them, and that obviously offsets some of the cost. And then we do need to model the future demand, looking at all possible options for accommodation. So at this stage, I'd say until that work is done and we're clearer on future demand, and as the numbers are relatively low in temporary accommodation across the district, we need to carefully consider all options, of which council-owned temporary accommodation will just be one. We may also consider longer-term leased accommodation if the needs arises, as procuring accommodation on a longer-term basis is usually more effective. As the council doesn't currently own any purpose-built accommodation, it's likely that you would have to do some substantial borrowing to purchase any accommodation, even modular units. And with any setup, you do need to then look at the ongoing maintenance aspect. Which again is not something we've currently got in place. So potentially, and that's why we need to do more work on this, that could be costly and would potentially negate any cost savings that you're making out of placing people in bed and breakfast. So it's not a no, all options will be considered, but I don't think that we've mapped enough our future demand to know what we really need yet.
Does that answer your questions? A supplementary?
Do we have, is it possible to have a published cost of outgoings as far as bed and breakfast and all the various other things, the cost of homelessness to this district?
Yes, it is possible to do that. That's the modelling at the moment that is happening for me, obviously, since I've arrived. So there's two costs. There's the cost that you pay out, and then there's obviously the net cost, because there is some money that you receive back. So some is obviously either covered by benefits, or if people can afford it, they would have to make a contribution to that. So there are two separate costs, but that is definitely something that can be provided.
Councillor Mrs Mason.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I would like to echo Councillor Wootton's comment on such a comprehensive and informative report. I would like to just draw your attention to page 6.4, 3.2. It says the last full review of the housing allocations policy was in 2018. We are now 5 years on. There have been lots of economic, social and cultural changes, and I wondered when the next full review will take place. I'm pleased to hear that there's a review of temporary accommodation, but I do think that with the time that has passed, a full review should be implemented, and I would like that observation passed on to the executive for consideration. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I would just say that periodically people do, authorities do usually review their allocations policy. It is an extensive piece of work. You have to do a lot of consultation around that. So you need to make sure that you time that in best placed, because with other commitments, because it's obviously a sensitive sort of topic, and you do actually get quite a lot of consultation back. There is a huge amount that would need to be done on the equalities impact assessment. So yes, periodically people do usually review the allocations policy, and it has been a while since it's been done, but it just needs to be programmed in carefully.
You'd like to come back, councillor?
Yes, I appreciate the officer's comments and I recognise the difficulties that it could involve. However, I think we have an obligation to our residents to keep our reviews up to date, and I think 5 years, especially with the changes in the recent years that we have experienced, it needs to be done. So I would like that to be put into the recommendations on page wherever, 6.1.
Yeah, the report's for noting, but I believe we can add a recommendation, so I will second that. Thank you, Mrs.
Thank you.
Councillor Mrs. Mason. Councillor Mr. Sperry.
Thank you, Chairman. I've noticed from the report that we've only got a very limited number of homeless being accommodated outside our district. Has that changed? And the reason behind this is I know somebody who is on the point of being made redundant, not of her own making, and she is genuinely concerned that her job is in Rayleigh, and if she's relocated outside the district, how's her mode of getting back in here to do the work that she currently does? Is there anything that can be done to take this into account?
So we will look at all sort of obviously homeless applications and their circumstances individually. In fairness to with across the district, even when people are being placed outside of the district, it is in like neighbouring kind of local areas. Obviously, we like everybody else are facing a struggle to find accommodation, and our main obviously statutory obligation is to ensure that somebody is not homeless. But we will of course try and do everything we can around the circumstances if we're able to do so.
Are there any more questions? Councillor Mrs. Belton.
Sorry, I forgot one of my other questions. So this relates to page 6.4, item 3, and that the register essentially. Now we talk here about the criteria and that a lot of numbers join via the latter criteria of working 15 hours per week within the district. Within the strategy, which I haven't read, I apologise, does it lay out how we evidence that they work within the district, and is working from home or mobile working, for example, taken into consideration, because an office can be based in the district, but someone could be working much further afield? And how often do we review the list to check they're still eligible in terms of, for example, if it is their employment? And finally, if I may, the 3-year residency rule. If someone was to move outside of the district for a year or two, for whatever the circumstance may be, does that then mean they start again in terms of the 3-year residency rule?
So it's verified when they first join, and that's via wage slips and contracts. We do as much as we can, obviously, to verify that. We don't usually verify that again until they're close to being successful, because it's too much, obviously, on the administration to do it throughout the lifetime. You know, someone can be on the housing register for several years and their employment status can go up and down. But it is checked at the beginning when they join to make sure they're eligible. And if they are likely to be successful for a property, we reconfirm those details. And with regards to the 3-year residency rule, I will have to double check, but I believe so certain times they will do 3 in the last 5 years, and that's in certain people's allocation policy, but I will confirm that for you.
Thank you.
Thank you. If there's no more questions, I just have one, and just one small typo. Page 6.3, 1.1. It says that most homes across the district are privately owned, with 88% of properties classed as owner-occupier or without a mortgage. There's approximately 6% of properties which are privately rented, and the remaining 6% is affordable housing. My question is, how does this measure against other councils in meeting their housing needs? So how are we doing against other councils, please?
Okay, so there are high levels of home ownership across this district, and that is more so than some others in the local area. As a result of this, that means that there is less private rented accommodation by the nature of that. Due to the this demand, it's high as there's more residents looking for a smaller number of properties. This keeps the rents high. Unfortunately, and the monthly rent being charged here is above that of kind of local housing allowance, which means if you were in receipt of full housing benefit, you would have a shortfall to pay, and you'd have to find that out of your remaining income. That's not unique to the Rochford district. It is in the southeast, but it does lead to a particularly challenging housing market, especially when we are looking for alternative or residents are looking for alternative rented accommodation.
Thank you. And it's very small, minor typing error on page 6.3 to 2.2. We are a district, not a borough, that's all. Any more questions? Okay, then members, we have one recommendation. I'm just going to read that out and verify that with Councillor Mrs Mason, that the Overview and Scrutiny Committee requests that the Executive initiates a review of the housing allocations policy. A full review. So I'll read that out again. The recommendation, members, is the Overview and Scrutiny Committee requests that the Executive initiates a full review of the housing allocations policy. All those in favour? Oh, did you want to come in there? Sorry.
Yeah, sorry, Madam Chairman. I would just like to put the reasons why. That the fact that it has been 5 years and because of the cultural, social and economic changes that have been quite dramatic in that time. I think if that we hadn't experienced the changes that we have seen, I wouldn't be proposing this, but in the light of that, I think it's quite important. So I'd like that to be added into the recommendation, please, the reasoning. Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, members. We wouldn't normally build the reasoning into the recommendation, but obviously this will be referred to the Executive, so we can include in the report that goes to the Executive the committee's reasoning for suggesting this recommendation.
Are you content with that, Mr.
Yes,
Councillor
I'm
Mrs.
perfectly content with that.
Lovely, thank you. So, members, all in favour of the recommendation, please raise your hands. Thank you, members. That's unanimous. And members, is the rest of the report noted? Thank you. Can I just say thank you very much, Lauren. Thank you for that agenda item. And if you want to go, you're most welcome to. Members, agenda item 7, the cost of living payments. Just before I pass over to the officer, I just want to make a couple of comments here. So just a little bit about the working group. I just want to, first of all, just give a little bit more background than that is in the paper, in the fact that one of the things we were discussing within the working group is the group of residents known as JAM, which I learned it means just about managing. So we need to look after all our residents, those who are really suffering the impact of the cost of living crisis and those who possibly are struggling with it as well. I want to give credit to Councillor Mrs Gadsden. The working group met continuously during the holiday period and she was there throughout, but unfortunately can't be here tonight. And I also want to thank Tim Willis, our Director of Resources, who put together this report in an outstanding time, especially as he had been on his annual leave as well. I will now pass over to Tim to introduce the report.
Thank you very much, Chair. This report follows a full council resolution which requested this committee set up a working group to look at options to address how council tax customers could be supported in light of the higher cost of living. And this report presents the working group's proposals, and I'm happy to help answer any questions there might be.
Members, are there any questions? Councillor Ward.
Thank you, Chairman. There's actually, there are 3 questions I've got here. Recommendation 1, or recommendation 2, I should say, that the interim director resources allocate 7,000 from the council tax hardship fund for one-off use in the current financial year. I was wondering why there was an underspend and what information was available to access the fund? If I probably take them one by one, might be easier. That was the question.
Thanks. So I'll answer those two questions. Did you want to?
Councillor Ward, if we can let the officer answer that one, and I'll come back to you for your further questions.
Okay. So why was there an underspend available? So there's £7,000 being put on the table here. We anticipate that there will be an underspend based on the levels of demand in respect to the budgets that this will be drawn from. Most demand for both the Council Tax Support Fund, which I'll talk about in a moment, as well as the Hardship Fund, tends to be at the soon after the billing. And once the billing has been done and people realise they may need support, that's normally when all the demand is, and then it tails off during the rest of the year. So we gain confidence that there's going to be an underspend on these sorts of budgets as we get this halfway through the year, financial year. It's not unusual not to fully spend the Hardship Fund. It is quite common, and the unusual thing that has happened this year for 23-24 is the government allocated us £95,000. It's called Council Tax Support Fund. It's another similar name, but it's specifically available to support people, council tax support, and the council approved £25, up to £25 for everyone that was on council tax support out of that 95,000, and it's only used 64,000 of it. So there's that money available as well, and perhaps because there's that funding, it's meant that the Hardship Fund hasn't been in as such demand this year as it might otherwise have been. We will be taking stock in October, as we normally do, in terms of people struggling to pay their council tax bills. And we would look to further to support residents who are struggling to pay. Despite knowing that, we still believe there'll be sufficient underspend of £7,000. Just in terms of information, there's information on bills about Council Tax Support Scheme, which is the main scheme that is available to support those that are struggling to pay. Our website provides details on how to access council tax support, as well as the Hardship Fund. And the proposed use of the £7,000 is also to support those residents in need, albeit not direct financial support.
Does that answer your question, Councillor Ward? Thank you. Would you like to ask your next question?
Thank you very much. You want to arrange a grant award of £7,000 for roadshows to assist residents. This goes back to the original question of what information was available to access the fund. I would like to see this underspend allocated directly to those in need. Surely a better directed advertising throughout the district would be more cost effective. The council considers, as part of that budget process, the inclusion of ongoing funding of £5,000. I'm just putting this all together for similar purposes. I need to fully understand the necessity for this spending sum. So I'm just putting those couple of things together of using, why you're using the 7,000 for road shows and also the 5,000 for a similar purpose.
I will let the officer come back first, and then perhaps I can give you a little bit more information from the working group.
Thanks, Chair. Yes, the working group obviously had deliberations of its own and drew conclusions that are before you tonight. And I advised the working group, but the working group came to their decisions, and I'm sure the chair who's also chairing the working group, will be able to help out on some aspects of that. The only thing I would add is that actually part of the working group's requests of me were to do some research, and we did contact another local council not that far away from here that I promised I wouldn't name. After they told me what they told me, but they set aside a fairly large sum of money. It was all of their the income they generated from increasing council tax by more than they had originally planned, because the cap went up without a referendum. And they set it aside to invite bids from people who needed to be given grants. And the take-up was very poor. They put an awful lot of work into publicising it and administering it, but the take-up was very poor, and that was 6 months into the scheme. So I think that there is evidence that a number of people who perhaps councils would most like to help, if they're not already receiving help through things like the council tax support, they are quite hard to reach. And so you can put an awful lot of effort in and not get much response back, which is, I dare say, one of the factors that the working group considered when it was coming up with ideas as to what it can do to help with the cost of living crisis.
Thank you, Tim. So to give you a little bit more information, Councillor Ward, when the working group met, we talked about what you mentioned about the most needy, but not forgetting there is also a group of people who are still suffering from the cost of living crisis, who perhaps don't meet some of the criteria for some funds. We're also looking at the groups that you mentioned being hard to reach, as Tim mentioned. Therefore, if you put on an event or invite them to apply, well, can they apply? How do they get there? The idea around the roadshow is to go out to these communities. And we're not just looking at including information now on the cost of living crisis, but it can be advice around budgeting, cooking on a budget. The group that the council work with, the hub at the mega centre, have all the partners that can deliver various information to them. So we thought, well, that on the back of these, and 7,000 isn't an unreasonable amount to ask for somebody to pull something together for us in this financial year, with the aim to reaching as many people as we can in our district. Does that make sense?
No, thank you, Chairman. No, it makes sense as far as that's concerned. I just find that, I mean, I'm sure the working group, came to their ideas after listening to everything. It was just the fact that obviously there are people who are outside of the net, let's say, who do not receive the normal council thing. And they are obviously the people who don't know how to get anything. I take it those are the people you are targeting, the people who don't know how to actually approach and get anything supplementary.
Yes, that group, but also anyone. So these roadshows will be for anyone to go along to. And we're hoping that ward councillors will be involved in them and promote them and be there to talk to people as well. I don't know if any other members of the working group wanted to come in at all. You're more than welcome. Councillor Mrs. Belton.
Thank you. A couple of points and a couple of questions. Firstly, thank you to Councillor McPherson for mobilising this working group and keeping the members of it very well informed when some of us couldn't attend. We always received very detailed explanations of what we'd missed so that we could make good decisions. And thank you to Tim, because certainly the first meeting, there was a lot of ideas bandied around, and Tim made sure we stayed on track and only spoke about things that were achievable so that we didn't go down the garden path, so to speak. On a point, I think that the £7,000 for the road shows, it will present great value for money. If we tried to give £7,000 to the residents most in need, they would get a tuppence each, and it would make no difference. But actually, if we can get those roadshows set up and multiple people can attend, the hope would be they will be able to save much more money than we would have been able to grant them, essentially, and learn behavioural changes and other benefits to things that are available to them in this district and around it. In regards to recommendation 4, I was really pleased to see that's here for us. Our small but pretty brilliant team looking after the cost of living at one of the last ONS meetings requested that, if at all possible, they're given a budget because they don't have one. And the only budget they did have was from the Leaders Fund, from Councillor Wotton's Leaders Fund last year. And that was able to deliver some good schemes. So hopefully we can see some repeat of that. My question given that we are quite a way through the year, is how soon do we think we could mobilise any additional events, and will we be able to spend that £7,000 this financial year? And I think that's actually my only question. My others were points. Thank you.
Just to say, thank you for your support in the working group, Councillor Mrs Belton. You're asking if they're able to mobilise this in this financial year. The hub that we have spoken to believe they can, and I'm happy to take their word for it. They've delivered excellent events in partnership with our officers in the past. Thank you.
Thanks. Could I just return to something that Councillor Ward said that I just wanted to cover off, which it was linked partly to what Councillor Belton said too, which is just re-emphasising something you said, Chair, that part of the original objective of the working group, I think, was to try and provide support to those that don't automatically receive support, for example, council tax support. Were there ways in which direct payments, for example, could be made to such groups of people? And the conclusion of the working group was that it was just not possible within the terms of reference of the working group to do that, given the complexities involved in assessing potentially individuals' wealth and circumstances and income. Councils, including this district council, isn't set up to administer such a scheme. It already has a scheme, which is the council tax support scheme, and to have another one was considered, it would be way disproportionate in terms of the administrative costs compared to the potential benefit of those that we might be able to help. On the £7,000, I was conscious that it was important that the working group brought something back to this committee with a cast iron certainty about the funding being available, and I can give that assurance. I am confident there is £7,000 available, so that won't be a reason to hold things up. I think I was also very aware, as the working group was, that the conclusion to set aside £7,000 for a grant to fund a roadshow or roadshows was a laudable and clear conclusion, but that left the work to be done in order to implement it. And conscious that the officer wasn't around the table of the working group that was responsible for that, which is Tracy Lilly. So that is something that I think the committee needs to bear in mind, that what isn't in the report before us tonight is how we're going to implement the recommendation. It is just a recommendation back, which fulfils the duty of the working group on behalf of the committee for full council.
Councillor Ward.
Thank you, Chairman. No, I appreciate the depth that has been explained to me in regards to the reasons and the thinking behind what went on, because that is not apparent in the report. It's just teasing out and understanding what is behind the report. And I do appreciate what Councillor Belton and what you yourself, Chairman, have added to the debate in regards to this, to give greater clarity as to the reasoning that money is being put in place. And I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any more, Councillor Wharton? If we can keep it succinct, if that's okay.
It'll be very succinct. It's not a question, actually, it's a comment, Madam Chairman, but certainly I think it's worth just going back in history to the fact that this all came about as a result of a proposal made in our budget meeting, but at that time it was an uncosted proposal, which I think sought the emotional agreement of all councillors to make sure that there wasn't a fundamental hole in not providing for our residents, and it was an uncosted, albeit an estimated £300,000 potentially being put aside based on the Uttlesford proposals. I'm delighted that some months on, and under your very excellent stewardship, all that has come out, and I say all that has come out, is that clearly there wasn't a huge gap that we were missing. So that's really good. But I really applaud the fact that we're still attempting to identify through spending this money members of the community. So I think a good bit of work has come out of it. I didn't agree that an uncosted item should come to the budget meeting, but I think out of it has come some really good work done by the working group under your stewardship. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor Gooding, if we can keep it succinct, thank you.
Yeah, firstly, apologies if I've got the wrong end of the stick here, but this is to Tim. Did I understand you say just now that if this was recommended or approved, at this present moment in time, you don't know how it would be implemented by the officers, or did I get the wrong end of it?
Thank you, Chair. No, I didn't quite say that.
Okay, all right.
What I was trying to emphasise was that that full council required the committee to set up a working group to look at this. The working group did so and reported back to this committee, and that's what this report is before you. And the recommendation is it includes to set out to spend £7,000 on roadshows, as in recommendation 3, and that's what you're being requested to approve.
Right.
It isn't to say the working group wasn't asked to go away and work out how you could spend £7,000 on roadshows, and there's a report on that. That sounds a little bit pedantic, but I'm conscious that the working group had to find time during the holidays to come up with a report and then get it written and before you tonight. It didn't trouble itself so much with implementing the recommendations. The priority around that, I think, especially with my guidance, was that it was costed and funded. And once that was in place, then we knew it could happen in theory. But then that does leave the outstanding issue of implementation, as is often the case when a committee recommends a course of action. That's why you have officers. We need to find ways to try and make it happen.
Right, okay, thank you.
Thank you. Our Director, Emily, you would like to just add something around governance on this?
Thank you, Chair. And actually it leads in nicely from Councillor Gooding's question. I just wanted to manage members' expectations that recommendations 2 and 3 that are in front of you today, if the committee chooses to adopt those recommendations, they will go to the executive to then consider before they're agreed to be implemented. So ONS are a recommending committee, so it then needs to go to the executive. And at that stage, the executive, as part of their decision making, will need to agree the correct funding source for that pot. So that will include any details around a grant condition or a grant agreement that might be attached to that. Recommendation 4 will go directly to council. And Chair, if I may, in the answers that you gave, you did refer to an organisation within the community that may provide services of this type. I just wanted to make it clear that at this stage there's no commitment to fund that particular organisation. Again, that will be a decision for the executive, because there may be other organisations in the district that might provide similar services. So I just wanted to make it really clear that there wasn't any commitment on the part of the council at this stage. Thank you, Chair.
Just one question then, please. When is the next executive that this can go forward? It is just that we are approaching the winter. Cost of living crisis is still with us, and the sooner that this is ratified or agreed, the better.
Thank you, Chair. There is an executive meeting on the 21st of September. There is a standing item on that agenda of matters referred from the ONS committee. So all being well, if there aren't any issues preventing it going forward, we could put it into that agenda. That agenda has been dispatched today, but because the agenda item is there, it means we can add tabled papers to that agenda item. Thank you.
Thank you. So, members, we've got 4 recommendations. Would you like me to read them all out, or have you? No, wonderful. Are you all happy to take them on block? Agreed. Thank you. So the 4 recommendations, which I will read out now, and then shall I read them? Yeah, better read them out, yeah. Recommendation 1, that the committee notes the findings of the working group. Recommendation 2, that the interim director resources allocate 7,000 from the council tax hardship fund for one-off use in the current financial year. Recommendation 3, that the director of communities and health arranges for a grant award of 7,000 for roadshows to assist residents to access support from them with the cost of living. Recommendation 4, that council considers as part of the 2024-25 budget process the inclusion of ongoing funding of £5,000 per annum for similar purposes. All those in favour, please raise your hand. Thank you, members. That is unanimous. So, moving swiftly on, item 8, highway rangers. Members, I will now invite the Council's Director of Environment, Marcus Houghton, to introduce this report.
Thank you, Chair. And good evening, members. I don't have anything further to add to the report, but I would like to express my thanks to the working group for their contribution to assisting with putting the report together, and their patience with the back and forth emails we had to finalise this. But thank you. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you, members. Are there any questions? Councillor Spearing.
Thank you, Chairman. Couple of points I think we should highlight on this working group, and it's not a criticism of the individuals involved. For the first time in my knowledge, we had a lead councillor involved at the meeting at this working group, which, as I say, I've never seen before. I did question this and was advised that this was perfectly in order. The other point I would like to highlight, Chairman, is that of the working group, all of us came from Rayleigh, which didn't give a very good cover for the whole district, bearing in mind that the majority, I would suggest, and Mr. Houghton might be able to confirm this, the vast majority or a considerable amount of the work undertaken by the highway rangers is taken outside of Rayleigh and in the more rural areas, which leads me on to the comments regarding the draft proposals to contact towns and parishes to seek expressions of interest in relation, obviously, to the funding. I understand the scenario was involved in it when county withdrew the money, but I don't quite know what we're trying to achieve here by contacting parishes and towns to see if it appears to contribute to the expressions and to support the highway rangers, when potentially the smallest district or parish in the district possibly has the most use of the rangers, but have the least amount of money and residents to contribute towards it. So, you know, what are we trying to do? Just find somebody else to find the money, which doesn't seem a very fair way of doing things. And yet the biggest town or the biggest number of residents who have the potential probably use the highway rangers least of all. But Mr. Houghton might be able to advise whether that is approximately right. But if we're going to go down this sort of road, a big place like Rayleigh, on the number of times they need somebody, probably wouldn't want to be involved with the highway ranger. They would do it on an ad hoc basis, Chairman. Thank you.
Before our officer comes in, I'll just come back. Unless our officer corrects me, league members can be part of working groups and advise. They are just merely not part of the decision-making process. Marcus, if you want to take up the rest of Councillor Spearing's questions, and Councillor Spearing, your mic's on.
Oh, sorry.
I think it's hard to quantify exactly. I mean, certainly you think the rural areas have a greater demand. I think I'd need that data in front of me to answer accurately, Councillor Spearing. It's a question of, obviously, a lot of the rural areas, although need attention, many of those areas cannot be addressed by the highway rangers. So if you recall, really the areas are limited to those of 30 miles an hour, 40 miles per hour, if we get some sort of measures in place. Occasionally we do sort of 60 mile per hour rural areas where the road traffic was put in place. So I would say, although there is an issue in the rural areas, I would say it's actually a bit more evenly spread perhaps than first meets the eye, but that's sort of an anecdotal recollection. I would actually need to break down that data by ward. Thank you.
Does that answer your question, Councillor Spearing, as much as possible?
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Yeah, I pretty much guessed what that was going to be the answer. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Mrs Mason.
Thank you, Chair. I must admit I have quite some difficulty with this report, especially the conclusions. The report summary starts off by saying It explores the possibility of further sources of funding. Then it says, or through drawing down the South East Essex Partnership surplus funding. Yet further on in the report, it states that there was £186,000 returned, which represented 11 years, which is roughly 17,000 a year. And yet in the report, it states that the cost of the highway ranges is estimated to go up to about 80,000. So I don't think that's realistic. And I also think it's concerning because certainly in my ward, I've got issues with South Essex Parking Partnership outstanding, and I believe other members have as well. So I'm a bit concerned when there's issues that should be addressed through that body that apparently aren't being addressed, but we're getting money back and not the service perhaps that we would expect. Secondly, the issue of parishes. A lot of the parishes do anyway cut and maintain open spaces. A lot of them have staff, some of them certainly do, and some of them, Hawkwell in particular, I think, has a stunning amount of equipment. And I do believe that it's up to the parishes how they wish to allocate their funds in their districts, in their parishes, I should say, not districts, excuse me there. So again, I have a slight problem with that. I don't mind them being asked, but I think it's an unrealistic expectation. The fundamental problem with the highway rangers is that it's no duty on this council to provide it. This council has very, shall we say, restricted and difficult financial circumstances at the moment. And I hope that all members are aware of the potential problems that are coming up. And with that in mind, I don't think that this council can afford to spend £80,000 on a service that we're not obliged to provide. This is double taxation on our residents. It is not, they will be paying for it through Essex and also through us. I noticed that the report says publicity. People think it's Rochford District Council. They don't. The public actually are totally confused. It's not that they consider it's us, because I get most of the phone calls from my district, so I know. Most of them think it's Essex, or they ask for clarification. Some think it's us. I think if we do not undertake this service, the clarity of information will be much better. We can then signpoint people to the responsible authority, and there's no reason why we can't put information on our websites. So the clarity of message needs to be done. So I do not support the basics of this report. I'm happy to note it, but I'm not happy to support the recommendations. And I think we owe it to our residents to be very financially prudent. Thank you.
Thank you. And Marcus, did you want to come back on some of the clarification around the figures?
Thank you. I mean, that's accurate what you said about the figures. I mean, it's a one-off payment that would have covered the budget for another year. I think the recommendations mentions 24, 25, doesn't suggest that it could cover that beyond there. And like I say, there is a financial gap that needs addressing in the longer term, but it's for members to make that decision. I said there has always been concern in the longer term. Then there may be an issue to finance this, hence a review of the open spaces budgets as well to see whether these could be used to help fund that in the longer term. But you're absolutely right, it does cost about £80,000 a year. The set surplus would fund it for this year, which is doing so, and for next year at the best. And then after that, you have a decision to make again. But it's the view of the working group at the time. I think that there was an intention to at least try and keep the service going for as long as possible.
You want to come back, Councillor Mrs Mason?
Yes, I'm going to come back on Mr Houghton's disposal of the 186. I know that we spent some of it. My understanding was it was the portfolio holder, the previous portfolio holder, had other schemes in mind for the rest of that balance. I assume it's not being spent, as you're suggesting goes for the. I don't think we should use that money. I do think that we have greater demand. I would actually rather see it go on cost of living, because that's where we have a great need. We don't have a great need to double taxation our residents in this way, and I don't think it's justifiable.
Okay, Councillor Mrs Mason. Oh, sorry, Councillor Mrs Belton.
Thank you. no problem. Few points. I actually disagree with Councillor Mrs Mason on a number of items there. I don't disagree with the double taxation and the fact that this falls under Essex County Council, but I think ultimately residents want the work done. I take a number of calls about constantly pavements, overgrown hedges, weeds, so on and so forth. Residents are confused. They don't understand. A lot of residents are confused and don't understand the 3 tiers of local government and who's responsible, but ultimately they just want somebody to get the job done. I was at Hockley Parish meeting just this week where they realised they've been undertaking work that they shouldn't have for quite some years, and they're now not prepared to do so anymore. So they'll be speaking to the district and county to understand that. I believe that we have a responsibility to residents that if the county are going to stop this service, we have to find a way to fund it. And I think if it's going to cost £80,000 a year, we need to factor that money into our budgets to deliver it, because messy district creates unhappy residents. And whilst there are many other items and many other things within our remit that we could spend the money on, this is one that I think all of us around this table probably take quite a few calls about. We see it constantly on social media, people challenging the overgrown hedges. This year's been particularly wet, and I think that's possibly created more complaints than usual. And there's an expectation that the rangers have actually already gone because of the county cutting the budget, but we know that's not the case because the set funding was put there. My question though just relates to items 2, 3 and 4, sorry, recommendations 2, 3 and 4. Are there any timeframes on any of these?
Well, I think a further report will be brought back to the next overview and scrutiny committee, because I think there's some urgency on this in terms of making a decision. So I think we can, you know, I've obviously done some background work as this, why this report's coming forward. So I'd want to bring that forward fairly quickly. The draft proposal circulated to parish and town councils can be, I mean, if people wish us to do so, we can go forward with that. But I think I'd want the executive steer on that initially. So once the executive have said yes, we'd like you to do that expression of interest, then we can just send an email out. So and then the last one really is really the gift of the leader to decide when to do so. Again, it's them to decide if they wish to.
Thank you, Marcus. Just one point for members then. So recommendation R3, if we are going to get that proposal out to seek EOIs, which is a sensible approach in my opinion, the sooner the better, because everyone's starting to draft their budgets for next year already. And if we need to factor some extra spend in, whether that be funding the district's rangers or whether that be for parishes to determine if they want to do something else, we need that to happen sooner rather than later for the parishes to make decisions.
I think just some caution with recommendation 3. It's the practicality of coordinating. I think a response that a meaningful response in the time scale. So I think an expression of interest can go out. It's gauging those I think responses and managing those responses. I'm just recollecting my experience of managing and dealing with parishes for the toilets, for example, the leasing of the toilets. It was a long and drawn out process, and so you may get responses quite quickly from some, and there may be that want to respond and saying in principle it's a good idea, but will still take a long time to actually come back with anything concrete. So I think you get the expression of interest out quickly. I think to get anything meaningful back may take longer. I think really recommendation 3 should be seen as a longer term solution. I think there's a shorter term need to address the budget for next year, and then there's a longer term need as well, perhaps, which recommendation 3 is considering.
Councillor Mrs Belton, we're just looking at the calendar for the overview and scrutiny. The next meeting might be too full. So you didn't put forward any amendment to the recommendation. So if you don't mind, I will. The recommendation is reworded to say that a further report is presented to the next available overview and scrutiny. That's that first sentence. Are you happy with that?
I am. I'm just mindful that this council needs to set its budget. So if it's got to go to ONS and then to executive, does it have time to go to budget? Because we've got people in employment here that could be without employment if we don't source a budget. So I just think we need to be really mindful of time ticking. You've got the calendar in front of you, so I'll let you guys work out what's best, but just to be mindful of the employment is included here.
Okay, there's some people asking questions, so I'm going to take those, then we'll look at rewording the recommendation if need be. Councillor Mr Woodton.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Look, in terms of the background of this was last year's topic around this time when Essex first proposed doing away with their responsibility. It was at that time that Essex leaders and chief executives made strong opposition to the whole concept. I wrote a letter at that time. I had an informal meeting with Councillor Lee Scott, who is the Highways Portfolio, expressing Rochford's strong condemnation of this. And it was extremely disappointing. Coming to the service itself, I think there's a lack of clarity about what the service is. As far as I'm concerned, there are different areas of responsibility. We have certain public space that we're responsible for. Essex Highways have responsibility for their public space, a lot of it being sight lines, small spaces to allow motorists to have good vision, and parishes have responsibility for some areas there. I'm certainly with Councillor Mrs Mason on the double taxation. I think it's appalling. I can't go with this report at all, I'm afraid. I'm happy to note it. But it is quite wrong that what we are doing is no better than Essex County Council, just passing the buck and saying to the parishes, well, you pay for it. And the reality of that is, if you look at the parishes, the rural parishes, generally small populations, a disproportionate percentage increase, which impacts on people's cost of living within those parishes. So this is quite wrong that it is fudged. That is totally wrong. Someone has got to grab hold of this and say it is a county responsibility to manage open space that they have responsibility for, generally through the highways system. So I can't agree with R3. I think that an excellent job was done, but it was a sticking plaster to avoid the potential loss of jobs in terms of the SEP funding. It was always acknowledged it would last for about a year, but it wasn't really a permanent solution. I applaud officers and councillors at the time for coming up with that, but it was a diversion of money from other uses. Let's not lose sight of that as well. So for all sorts of reasons, it is a complete mess, and I think we ought to continue to lobby strongly, but differently from how it was this time last year. I think we ought to hold Essex County Council to do what they should do and make sure that the individual responsible bodies do what they should do, and certainly not pass it to the parishes as a fudge from RDC. But it's a difficult one. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Spearing, and if we can try and keep things quite short now, thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. While I have every sympathy for Councillor Mrs Mason's comments about how to utilise the 186,000, it was made quite clear by SEP that any of these expenditures had to be to the benefit of the highways system. And if we didn't, we had to submit a list of projects which they would sign off on. If they didn't approve them, then the money wouldn't be forthcoming. Just to clarify, Chairman, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Ward.
Thank you. Councillor Spearing has just clarified the question in regards to money, in regards to how highways money must be spent. Thank you.
Councillor Lambourne.
Yes, a point of clarification on the table, Appendix 1, page 8.8. The maths doesn't seem to work. It comes to 166,000, whereas the allocation was 186,000. Also, the projects that, apart from the financial support for the financial ranges, each of the projects that are listed there, they're very round figures. Have those works actually been undertaken? And are those figures actually correct?
Councillor Lambourne, Marcus will come back to you on those ones.
So I've worked backwards. The round figures there, they are what was requested from the funding. So they're not precise amounts. They're just what's being asked for in terms of grants from SEP. Yes, it's my mistake in terms of Appendix 1. I was still waiting one further line. I was just trying to ascertain the information as to what that additional £20,000 was spent on. So my apologies, I didn't add that at the time. So it's just an oversight that the report went out sooner than I could add that line in. I do apologise.
Thank you. Does that answer your, yeah, thank you. Are there any more, Councillor Mrs. Belt?
Just one very small point, again, on R3. If we're going out to parish and town councils, if this recommendation is approved, there's a lot of rumour and speculation at the moment amongst the parishes and the towns about what is happening, what is coming down the line. So I actually feel that communicating with them at an early stage to let them know potential situations is maybe the right thing, because if they all come back and say categorically, no, we're not prepared to fund any of this, at least this council knows they have one less option to consider. So whilst I don't agree with passing money or responsibility down the chain, as Essex have done to us and then we're potentially looking to do, I think it's really important that we understand what the parishes are or aren't prepared to do.
Good point. It can strengthen our argument. Councillor Mrs. Mason, you want to come back?
Yes, thank you for allowing me to come back. I'd just like to pick up a point that Councillor Lambourne made, quite rightly. He asked the officer which of these schemes had been done, and I don't believe we got an answer. So could we have some clarification on that? Because if we have a budget that we have to spend, we should be spending it. And to my knowledge, certainly some of these haven't been done. And I also must admit, I think the sign, £10,000, I think that's horrendous. So I hope it didn't cost that.
So if I can bring attention to recommendation 2, it's about reviewing the current allocation of surplus funding. So that is part of review to find out what the spend has been upon.
Yeah, perhaps could you tell us which, if any of those have been done? That's all.
I can try and recollect. We must understand it's not a budget I'm responsible for. It'd been useful to have that question in advance. I probably could have given. I'm just reluctant to give an answer that could be wrong.
May I just come in there? Perhaps, Marcus, if you could circulate that after the meeting to all members.
Yes, please, thank you.
Has anybody got any other questions? Okay, I would just like to make a couple of observations. I agree with a lot of the comments around the table. What is clear is that our taxpayer pays Essex to look after the roads. But we have got a problem. If we say no, my fear is, and I know our residents, they really don't know, who does what sometimes, and they just want it done. But moreover than that, I'm just looking at, only this week I was asked, how have you got on with the hedge by a school? So this is a hedge by a school. I looked on to make sure that it had been reported. It was on Essex County Council's website. How long will it take them to do it? Now, our rangers, often if I ask them, it's done within the same day, even days. That's how efficient our council is at doing Essex County Council's job, but now we're not getting paid for it. And my fear is if we don't carry this on, even if it's in the interim while we have a big argument with Essex County Council and make every single resident aware that Essex County Council are not carrying out their duty, then at least we can keep some of those hotspot areas which are danger cut. That's my thought. So I'm going to have to agree for this to continue in the interim while we fight Essex County Council to come to some conclusion with some funding for doing their job. Now, that over, sorry, my rant. Councillor Sperring, and can this be the last question or comment, please?
Very quickly, Chairman, while I share the sentiments of people expressed here, the arrangement that was agreed some years ago with Mr. Hott, myself and Essex County Council was that they would contribute the £70,000 and we would take on the responsibility for that duty. And that's as it stood. I share your view. If they've withdrawn that funding, then they've also withdrawn our obligation to undertake that duty. Thank you, Chairman.
So members, we have got 4 recommendations here now. Councillor Mrs. Belton had asked the officer about when the report will come. to the next overview and scrutiny committee. So recommendation 2, I'd like to recommend an amendment which reads the first sentence, members, that a further report is presented to the next available overview and scrutiny committee. I'm not going to read it all out. Have I got a seconder for that? Thank you, Councillor Mrs Belton. All those in favour? Thank you. I'm presuming everybody wants them taken separately. Okay. Recommendation number 1 for members to note the report is the report noted, members. Noted. Thank you. Recommendation 2, that further report is presented to the next available overview and scrutiny committee, reviewing the current allocation of surplus funding and exploring potential savings within the open spaces budget, with a view to identifying possible budget for the continuation of the Highway Ranger service in 2024-25. All those in favour? Oh, sorry, I'll propose that from the chair. I need a seconder, please. Councillor Lambourne, thank you. All those in favour? All those against? Any abstentions? None. Thank you. That motion is 10 for, 2 against, so that motion recommendation, is carried. Recommendation 3, to draft a proposal that can be circulated to parish and town councils seeking expressions of interest as set out in paragraph 1.19. Propose that. I don't need to propose that, do I? Yeah, propose that from the chair. Seconder, please. Thank you, Councillor Cross. All those in favour? And all those against? Oh, sorry. So that's 7 for, 5 against. There was no abstentions. No. So that recommendation is carried. And recommendation 4, that the leader of the council writes to the cabinet members of Highways Essex County Council seeking clarification regarding the provision of a service with withdrawal of funding for the Highway Rangers. Proposed again from the chair. Seconder, please. Thank you, Councillor Lambourne. All those in favour? All those against? So that's 7 for, 5 against, so that recommendation is carried. Thank you very much, members. So if we can move on now. Thank you, Marcus, for introducing that report.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, members again.
Yes, agenda item 9, Parks for Nature Review. Again, Marcus Houghton, if you would like to introduce this report.
My apologies coming in too early there. Thank you, Chair. Good evening, members. Again, nothing to add to this report, really. It's for noting, but happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, members. Councillor Ward.
Thank you, Chairman. It's a very simple one. Where residents have had objections, are measures being taken to advise appropriate changes?
I mean, certainly we're meeting with them, yes, and trying to accommodate where we can. I think at times there are instances where we have met with residents to find other residents that are in support of what we're doing, and some that will say that they're actually wanting to see the grass return, and others saying we actually like it as it is and we don't want to see it return. So there is a matter of compromise, and what we do tend to do is we meet with the lead member as well at the site, and then we seek to compromise where we can. We can't keep everyone happy, but we certainly, I think some of the members here have experienced that, reduce the amount of grass cutting or change the shape or the design lines. I think we always said it was going to be a very organic sort of process this, one which will respond to the needs and experiences as we go along.
Thank you. Does that answer your question? Thank you. Councillor Booth.
Just seeking clarification. Am I right in thinking there is a difference between not cutting and rewilding? And is there a greater cost to rewilding?
Rewilding can cover a range of measures. So not cutting the grass can be viewed as rewilding if you wish. I would advise that what we do tend to do, of course, is we still manage that site. So, it is left to grow long, but it's still annually cut and collected. And therefore there is some, if you like, active management of that site. So, but nevertheless, it is a form of rewilding. There are different levels of intervention. So I think the original paper alluded to that. So you can obviously introduce planting or wildflower mixes and that sort of thing, or even bulbs. Again, I think initially my advice would be that you tend to leave these areas as long grass initially, and you see how you go. Sometimes nature can surprise you and the flora responds well, and you will get a natural mix. Other times you have to intervene, but it takes time. So a good example would be, although it's not part of our rewilding scheme, but it's part of our country park, is Cherry Orchard. So if you look at there, the sward, the grass sward, you could just argue was long grass. We only cut that for hay once a year. But over the years where you've had that annual cut and you've managed in that way, then the flora has improved over the years. So, you've gone from what was very much a mix of ruderal sort of weed species to now recorded four orchid species this year. So, it takes time. So what starts off as looking as rank grassland, you have to keep returning to and managing. Thank you.
Does that answer your question, Councillor Booth?
Yes, thank you.
Councillor Mrs Mason.
Yeah, just a small point about the definition of, if you like, of rewilding. I did speak at quite length with one of our officer, our corporate manager, about that, and was advised that it was exceptionally expensive to do it properly. And I think it is, but we're not doing that. We're not planting native seeds and native plants. What we're doing is, as the officer said, we're just not cutting in the hope that some sort of succession will eventually take place. As we're cutting less, is there any staff savings in this?
Yes, the original report alluded to that. So the original Parks and Nature report that went to the executive predicted about £100,000 saving, and so there's approximately £150,000 saving to the grounds maintenance regime from bringing this in. Thank you.
Councillor Lambourne.
I may have got this wrong, but somewhere in the back of my mind, this is about 8.4 on page 9.5. In the back of my mind, somewhere I've heard that we've got a planning obligation to provide organised sports pitches for the district. Is this rewilding and removal of football pitches and whatever other pitches they are, does that compromise that requirement?
I mean, it hasn't. I mean, it could if you wish to rewild everywhere. But I mean, we have a playing pitch strategy to deliver so many pitches across the district, which we still honour. And so we haven't taken any active playing pitches out of action through this scheme.
Councillor Mrs Belton.
Thank you. Just following on from Mrs Mason's point, really, and I think it's quite important we manage expectations regarding rewilding and not cutting. To rewild properly, as we know, all of that grass would actually need to be cut right back to nothing and you start again. It's a process. It takes a number of years and it's not always successful. As you've alluded to, it takes different. So I think it's important for members that we understand what we should be expecting, because the terminology of rewilding, we kind of expect beautiful meadows and flowers and flora and fauna, and that's probably not going to happen, and certainly not going to happen overnight and take 2-3 years. So if we are going to attempt that, I think defining where that is likely to happen and what timeline might be useful, and budgets being set accordingly. But ultimately, I think the details are within the report and they're very useful. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any more questions? Marcus, I've just got one. Page 9.5, 8.5, it is recommended that it may be prudent to undertake a public consultation to ascertain a wider view from park users, particularly if any changes are to be considered to the existing management regime. Can I ask, how will this be undertaken? And just on the back of the wildflower aspect, could that be included within it to actually consult with our residents if that's what they would prefer?
So the consultation will take the sort of format that it did previously, which was an online consultation that's promoted in the parks. I think we had around 1,500 responses, so it was a good response and some very positive comments from individuals as well. So we'd take a similar approach again. I think just touching on again, I think the detail. I think you just want to establish those areas initially, and then you look at the feasibility of what you can do with them after that. But you'd want to do pilot schemes. You wouldn't say it's very unpredictable nature. So you can't predict. I wouldn't want to come to you and say any more than I'm going to provide an area of long grass. To say that I can then provide an area of wonderful drift of flowers is a gamble I don't want to take, because it's just, there is nature involved, the nutrient levels, the climate. There's too many variables there that actually you could put a lot of seed there and it could just be eaten by birds even before it even sets seed. So you've just got to take its time, unfortunately.
Thank you. I think what you said about unpredictable weather sort of sums it up really. I know how quickly the grass was growing this year, and I think with the rewilding, and we discussed this before, the main problem that we had was keeping the play areas, the football pitches under control in short. I think the officers done an admirable job and have now scheduled in more cuts, so that should help our residents. Oh, sorry, Councillor Mrs Mason, you want to come back on something?
I'd just like to have some greater clarity and consideration to the consultation. When the Parks for Nature was first mooted, I know we had the online consultation, but I go over my local park nearly daily, and I took it on myself to ask residents if they knew about the proposals. Not one person using the park knew about the proposals. So whilst we may have had a substantial response, it's not necessary from the people that use the facilities. So I would like to see if there is a further consultation that it's actually done in person as well, or so that we actually consult with the people that are using the facilities rather than people that might have an opinion on rewilding. Thank you.
I agreed to you to some context, because residents in my area said that they hadn't heard of it, even though I had shared the consultation myself. I think us as ward councillors could probably take that role on as opposed to officers, because of their capacity and talk to people. We can also perhaps, Marcus, consider having up posters, QR codes, that sort of thing, to encourage people actually in the parks, because people are going to look at that and think, well, what's that? And hopefully contribute that way as they're over. Are there any more? Please keep it very short, please, Councillor Ward.
It's going to be very short. Yeah, I was hesitating to bring this one forward, but I mean, on the mention of woodland areas and grasses, I would assume, and I would need a lesson on this one, is mare's tail a grass? Because I know it's quite invasive in Wyburn's woodland, and I know it does carry around. I just want a view with regard to that type of grass. I know it's an ancient grass, prehistoric, I believe. Thank you.
Going slightly off topic, but
Yes.
But I will answer it. It's not a grass. You're testing my memories of taxonomy now. I think it's a gymnosperm, I think, from memory. So, but it's a type of ancient fern.
Thank you, Marcus. And I'm sure if Councillor Wood's got any more questions off topic, he can ask outside of this meeting. So members, there is one recommendation set out at page 9.1 of the report to note the findings of the report. Are these noted, please, members? Thank you. Members, agenda item number 10, the scoping document for review of the council's outside bodies. You've all got the document and you have had it in your pack. Members, are there any questions on the scoping document? Councillor Wharton.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Generally happy with the document, but I would just raise under the terms of reference in that first section, in terms of what the review will examine, that first bullet point, I find it a little strange, i.e. Acela. I.e. is not E.g., and I think it should probably be E.g., i.e. that is to say, as opposed to, for example, yeah. So I think it's the wrong initials there, if that's agreed. Acela, we are 1/7 part of Acela. So it's not a good example to put it there because it's a partnership of which we are 1/7. I think there's plenty of examples to use.
Councillor Water, I'm just going to interject there.
Yeah, sure.
Is it an outside body that we attend?
No.
It isn't an outside body that we attend?
No. We are 1/7 of Acela. It isn't an outside body in the way other outside bodies, and I look to the monitoring officer for assistance on that, but we are 1/7 under a constituted arrangement. So I just don't think it's a good example of outside body, but I will look to the monitoring officer to give some guidance to me.
Taking on board what you've just said, Councillor Wotton, I propose, and I will need a seconder, that the review title is amended, Review of the Council's Outside Bodies and Acela. Do I have a seconder, please? Thank you, Councillor Myers. Yes, Councillor Mrs Mason.
Can I just say that there may be, and I think there's possibly others that are partnerships as opposed to outside bodies. And I think it would be, I certainly know that the seller was intended to be included in this. So if we could perhaps, I will refer to the monitoring officers as a review of outside bodies and perhaps partnership agreements. Would that be acceptable, Councillor Wotton?
More than happy with that, and I'd even go so far as to say I'll second it. But
yeah. Thank you. Yeah, brilliant.
That is absolutely perfect. I'm quite happy to withdraw what I proposed. So the title will now read Review of the Council's Outside Bodies and Partnerships. Are all in agreement? Wonderful, thank you. So moving swiftly on, are there any other questions on this report? So members, is the report noted? Yes, okay, thank you, just for the mic. All nodding at me doesn't work sometimes. Agenda item 11, key decisions documents. Members, are there any questions on the key decisions document? I can go through it if you would like me to, but you have got it in front of you. I can't see anybody indicating. You have had this in your pack, I hope. Councillor Mrs Mason.
It's not a question, but I think it's something that was we may have mentioned before, and something that perhaps the committee might like to be aware of, is that at the moment there is a date put in for when the decision is to be made, and I notice this is actually wrong. It's got portfolio holder. Actually, this is totally wrong. It should have, unless I've got the wrong copy, it should have the lead member against it, which the one I've got on my computer did have. This is the wrong document that's been circulated to myself. I don't know if everyone else has got the same one. It should have, yes. The decision maker should be executive with the lead member identified in brackets underneath. And in future, if the date is changed, because there has been a propensity for the date to be altered, then it has been agreed that the reason for that date change will also be put in the report so that we will have greater clarity. I don't know where the correct document is, but it's not substantially different, is all I can say.
I'm happy to come back on that, Chair. Firstly, committee members, just an apology that perhaps an earlier iteration of the work plan, key decisions document, sorry, has been circulated. And just to confirm Councillor Mrs Mason's comments that yes, we will be referring to the members of the executive with their current title, which is lead member. And I absolutely agree that a very important part of good governance is to track where the key decisions have been delayed or moved in the scheduled date of decision, that we show that in the key decisions document, because whilst it might be apparent for those of us that have the conversation, we need to make sure that it's very clear for the public where our intended date of decision making has slipped or has moved for some reason.
Thank you. Are you happy with that response, Councillor Mrs Mason?
Yes, I'm more than happy. I have seen the amended document, so it's just someone's picked up the wrong ones for printing. It's an error, it happens. Thank you.
Councillor Cross.
Yeah, just a small point. In an effort to save a few rainforests, I've been diligently using my CMIS because I was told to. But that item is missing in the documents. It's not exempt, obviously.
This is a difficult one. In previous years, the key decision document is on there, but it hasn't come out with the pack. I can assure you that it will do in future. Councillor Sperring.
Thank you, Chairman. Again, I'm not quite sure where my comments fit into the latest scenario, whether it comes into the work plan or to the key decisions. But back in March, April time, we had quite a lengthy discussion about blue badge parking restrictions and implementation. A subsequent report was supposed to be coming, unless I've missed it. I can't remember seeing that. There was also going to be another one about amendments to the volunteer policy. I don't know whether that one's been slid through that I haven't seen.
Sorry, Councillor Sperring, are you talking about the work plan now?
Well, I say I'm not quite sure where it comes in. That's why I'm asking the question.
It's item number 12, the work plan.
Okay, fine, thank you.
Was there any other comments or anything on item 11? Key decisions document. Fine. So now we're on to agenda item 12, the work plan. So you believe there's items missing from the work plan, Councillor Sperring?
Yes, Chairman. There's one that we had quite a lengthy conversation. I think you were front and centre on it in relation to periods of 3-hour parking for blue badges, and there was supposed to be a subsequent report coming forward after various questions have been asked and a number of people with blue badges. There was also amendments being requested for the council's volunteer policy at the same time. And also, Chairman, I have a question, and again, I'm not quite sure where I can put this. Back in March, April time, the council was trying to put together a glyphosate policy. I don't know where that's progressed. Purely, as Councillor Ward has mentioned, there is a huge problem with this particular weed, fern, or whatever it is, all over the district. And while I appreciate glyphosate isn't used by the district council any further than it needs to be, it is the only thing that, as I understand, will have any effect on mare's tail and its control and on Japanese knotweed. Now, for years, the district council has supported towns and parishes in the control of this pest, for want of a better phrase. I've now been told that they will no longer support the parishes. So where do we go? What advice? The only advice I've received so far is that we should use a flame gun in the middle of summer, which I didn't think was the best idea. So I'll leave that one with you, Chairman.
Yep. So the blue badge, I do recall that it was on there. So if we can have that put back onto the work plan. Emily can give an update on the Blue Badge report.
Thank you, Chair. So when the Overview and Scrutiny Committee called in the portfolio holder decision on the Blue Badge parking, there were a number of recommendations that came out of that, one of which was that a report exploring all the options goes to the full council. So it wasn't an item to come back to Overview and Scrutiny, it was an item to move into full council for discussion. And with regards to the portfolio holder decision that was called in and then kind of referred back to the executive, that is now in the process of being implemented.
Fine.
Chair, if I might, well, I've just got the floor. The other two, the volunteering policy, I need to go back and refresh myself what the recommendations from the committee were. And I'm not even going to attempt with the other one, and I think I'll take that offline if that's okay, Chair.
Certainly, thank you. Sorry.
Any other question? Councillor Ward.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Yeah, it's something I'd like to see added to the work stream, and that is on the 2nd of November, we have planning enforcement update. Can I also ask, we have a development management update on the service review, which I know has been taking place?
In theory, yes. If we can just let officers come back to us, if it's possible to produce the report for us by the 2nd of November. If you're telling me the work's been undertaken, then it should be. But I don't want to actually put them on the spot to come back on the 2nd if it's not. But it can be put into this year's work plan.
If they come back. It was started prior to May, so March, April time. We got the review on the go, so I would hope we would have some answers in regards to that service review. Thank you.
Yes, we will ask officers, see when they can bring it forward. Of course, we've also got the report now that can come forward perhaps on the 2nd of November that we discussed earlier on. So that's something else for our work plan. Any other questions or comments, members? And I do believe that with that is the end of our meeting for this evening. Thank you very much. We did a lot of work tonight, and have a lovely evening.